This is Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski. Here now, Tony Brueski.
Substance abuse did play a role in his life as well. We know he was a heroin addict for several years, from what I understand, allegedly. Basically, self-medicating himself. How does something like that then affect, assuming there's already this inherent thing going on in his brain, does that exacerbate the problem? Does it alleviate it for a certain amount of time? I mean, obviously, a lot of times when people self-medicate, they're trying to alleviate their pain of what their brain is doing to them. How does that affect what maybe we'd seen here?
Yeah, it's hard to say, but alcohol is heroin, alcohol. These are downers. These are things that help people relax. And we can look at 2/3 of the country right now and say they're all self-medicating, if not 3/4 of the country.
Sure.
Everybody's having their wine at dinner or their beer after work, and everybody's trying to moderate their mood state in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So it would make sense that if a person is really tense, really uptight, really has an obsessive personality, that heroin would feel pretty good to them. And that maybe when he went off heroin, those obsessions got worse. He became more angry, more agitated, more irritable. And that's been reported as well, that he had that shift after,
Mm-hmm.
So it's speculative, but it's certainly interesting and complicated to try to take somebody like this apart and make sense of everything that they were experiencing. I don't think we can say this is a guy who had an abuse history. He seemed to come from a very normal, fine family.
Mm-hmm.
And these folks, what we know about them, the sexually dominating killers, they start with those kind of fantasies really young in life, 8, 9 years old. They're thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And even though they don't have a history of violence, usually they don't, these
Mm-hmm.
kind of folks.
Yeah.
They're not impulsive in that way, like the guy that goes out and gets in bar fights or road rage kinds of things. They don't typically do that, but they've got a really active fantasy life that goes on for years before they act out on those fantasies.
I mean, and his parents, from what we know, and we're just really speculating here based on kind of what we've heard and what's been speculated on, especially like in Howard Blum's book about the case, about folks who, allegedly were friends with some of the family. The family, from what we understand, kind of suspected. He may be capable of doing something like this, which would be a weird thing to think about your kid. If you're like, oh, yeah, wonder if my brother did that. He has the same sort of car. I mean, those are some of the allegations that have been made. When a family recognizes that, or like that's their reaction, what does that say about what they knew about him? And in no way am I saying like they could have prevented this, but I mean, what kind of warning signs, are there where that's in the back of someone's mind, and you're not going to be shocked if, the loved one that you have in your life, you're not shocked when they maybe are accused of doing something like this.
It's really so telling when parents often come forward in cases where there's been some kind of extreme violence and say, we always knew he was different. We always knew he had struggles. We always knew he was not comfortable with women, and maybe even expressed having anger or hatred toward women. It happens a lot where parents see this stuff. Sometimes they normalize it because they just say, well, this is how he is. He's always been different that way. But he's a good guy. He would never do anything terrible. And then you find parents who are a bit more insightful, or sisters who are more insightful, who see that, these are the red flags of somebody who's potentially dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, that's it got to be a hard thing just in general as a sister, as a brother, as a father, as a mother, whatever it may be, to kind of accept that of the person that you care about, the person that's part of you.
Totally.
That oh my God, how could they be thinking this sort of way? What does it tell us about his interest in the criminology field? And I mean, he was not a dumb guy. I mean, he was,
No.
finishing up his PhD, and he certainly, went through the path of being educated on this.
Yeah.
What does that tell us about any of this?
Yeah, that's another thing that makes me think he's not very likely at all to be psychotic, because you couldn't have the academic focus that this guy obviously had if you were having delusions and hallucinations, so I don't think he's psychotic. But the interesting criminology and criminality is very common among people who commit mass murder or serial killers. They study other killers. They want to understand the criminal mind. Sometimes there may be a drive to understand themselves, but often it's, how do I get away with it? How do I become a better criminal? So that does not surprise me. There have been some that worked in law enforcement, and many that studied it.
And that's an interesting thing with this, because when he was studying at DeSales, I believe it was, when he put out a research project, he was asking very specific questions of people. And I don't know that it was odd. I mean, to the average person who's not in that field, it feels a little creepy and weird, where it's, and I'm just paraphrasing, but like, how did you feel when you committed your crime? Like, what was going through your mind? It was almost, it felt, now that we have the full picture, of the allegations against him, like almost a guidebook to how he should process the potential crime he was, maybe pondering committing at that point in time.
Yeah, looking for a peer group almost.
Yeah.
You can certainly put that spin on it. Those kind of questions are, when you're studying forensic psychology, those are the kinds of things that you're interested in. And when you start doing interviews with people who have done awful crimes, murder or other things, those are the questions you ask them. What was going on in your head? What were the precursors? What were you thinking while you did it? How did you feel after you did it? So the questionnaire in and of itself seems pretty normal for that field of study. But yeah, in hindsight, there's a creepy element to it. What was he getting out of this emotionally? And was this meeting some kind of need for him?
Yeah, that's the weird part about all of it. Where was this all going? Was this strictly just part of his studies, and then somehow this crime kind of came about? I mean, let me ask you that. I mean, and this is just obviously pure speculation, but where does one go from, being a criminology student? You're excelling in your craft. Obviously, he wasn't very good at teaching. He got fired for that. But he was on a path where, had he or allegedly not been accused of these crimes or committed these crimes, would likely end up working somewhere in that field. Where does someone go astray like that to get so obsessed with something that it would drive you to commit these crimes? Because from what we know, he did not necessarily know these people very well at all. There was some sort of connection probably to target. I can't imagine he just wandered into a house at random and just did this. But what is the factor that flips somebody to get so obsessed and so violently obsessed, allegedly, against basically virtual strangers?
Yeah. Yeah, the obsessions would have started at least a decade earlier, I think, with violent fantasies, violent sexual fantasies, masturbating to violent pornography. I would really like to know the contents of his computer. You generally find quite a trail of a fantasy life that's very active and very sexually violent. And then my guess is that because of his fascination and obsession with the topic, that's what drove him to study criminology. So it's like the fantasies came first, and then the obsession with other killers and crime, that came later. And then, well, how fun would this job be? We all want a job that we can be excited about in the morning, right?
Sure.
And for him, a person like this, thinking about working in crime was mood elevating. It was kind of fun for him. Whereas most people who go into it are, can be really overwhelmed with the dark side and find it, it's like, gee, I don't want to hear another horror story. That was my reaction to it. I really burned out pretty quickly with wanting to know and being curious. It's like, I'm just tired of the subject. But a person like this would experience a mood enhancement from the darker aspects of humanity. So.
Assuming he's the guy that did this, and obviously innocent until proven guilty, but were these victims more so a representation of maybe what he didn't like what they stood for, who they were. They were young, attractive, popular people that he really never was. I mean, was this more so lashing out at what they represented versus who they may actually have been?
Yeah, very, very likely. There's usually a symbolic element in the way victims are chosen. And, people who commit serial sexual homicide have a type that they typically go for, whether they're short brunettes or tall blondes or curvy women or thin women. They've all got a preference, and that's their sexual fantasy. So it's probably a combination of having rage at women. A lot of times they're people who have been rejected, and so they simmer on that rejection and that anger. And women that he found sexually attractive and appealing. And then this sexual urge gets combined with the rage and the violent fantasies, and you get this really ugly outcome. And my guess with these particular people is that he was attracted to one or more of the women, had seen them around this community, which was a very small town, possibly had some kind of interaction with them, however briefly. It may not have gone well, or they may never have even noticed him or been aware of him. Guys like this will often stalk, and the victims don't even know that somebody's peeping in their windows or stalking them around town. They're completely oblivious to it. And so my guess is there was one or more of the girls that he had that kind of thing going with, the fascination, and then the other people who were present were just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Do you think that's what it comes down to with this case specifically, where it was something like that, where maybe his intention was just to go after one of them alone, and it happened to be he didn't expect that there's going to be other people there, another woman and her boyfriend, and this one of the girls' friends, the other roommate, and there's still two people. I mean, was this just a really horribly planned out crime that ended up, and I'm not trying to say this in a good way, but ended up working out for him, that he was able
Right.
to get in and get out the way that he did
Right.
without being taken down himself?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's it. It was, if this was, as far as we know, the
Yeah.
first time this person had done this, then it's hard to put words to it,
Hmm.
whether he felt lucky that it went as well as it did and he got away.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's absolutely nightmarish, and our hearts go out to those families of these incredibly wonderful young people who it just should not have happened.
Yeah.
The world of true crime never stops, and neither do we. Press subscribe now to get daily updates, in-depth analysis, and expert opinions from the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today.